personal best. Let's talk to some anglers and find out the when, the where, and how they caught their personal best, their biggest muskies of their life. This is going to be interesting. You know what I'm saying, Jay?
You know it. This is going to be cool.
Well, let's see here. My personal best muskie by length was a 56-inch fish that was caught mid-July of 2 years ago. And so that would make it 2017. Had to think about that. Anyhow, it was actually caught on a Lee Lures number 10 Boilermaker, and it was the very first bite I personally ever had on the Boilermaker. I was fishing with a couple customers, Travis and Richard Storch, and netted this thing. And actually, let me back up a little bit. We were on the perfect icon, right where I wanted to be, at first dark, basically, which coincided with moonrise. And, well, the bait landed on the icon. I set the hook, and I said, net, this is probably the biggest fish I've ever hooked. And that thing fought all the way to the boat on a bomb cast, just head shaking like I had never felt head shakes before. Get it in the bag, and I'm like, yeah, this is my longest muskie ever. And ended up being that 56 by 25-inch fish. Summertime fish, was built like a tank. And you can obviously see the video of it. It was a really quick, clean release. That actually the video of the fish is complete live with no cuts, how long we had it out of the water and right back into the water. And as you can see, that fish pretty much tried to eat my head off when it took a couple of shakes. That thing was still upset about the whole situation. But yeah, it was on a black holographic with silver blade Boilermaker. That was a super monster. No doubt, and someday I hope to break that.
All right, we're here with Matt. Congratulations, you guys won the PMTT last week again.
Yep.
Top Gun 2.
Yep.
Now you're back doing some musky fishing before waterfowling. Looks like we got a little waterfowl rig going here.
Yeah,
cool.
Taking her down to duck camp, get my guide started up tomorrow, and then I'll be back up to fish next week. So
Cool.
My personal best muskie, it took place in western Minnesota. First time on the lake. We got out there in the afternoon. Kind of did a little bit of marking, and then I was like, okay, let's just kind of do this drift down the sweet edge, and made a cast, and I hooked up, and I thought it was a pike. Like, we probably had about 15-mile-an-hour west winds, and I'm just kind of drifting the edge. So when I set the hook, the fish kind of came at me. So I couldn't, the rod didn't really load up that good, and then when the fish swam at me, and it hit way out on the end of a bomb cast. So it's just one of those deals where I just didn't know what it was at first till we got close, and then we got a little closer on to the boat, and then he started bulldogging down. Then I could feel the weight of the fish. So that ended up being a 52-incher. It was kind of mid-afternoon, first day on the lake. That's the personal biggest I've caught and stuff. I've netted a few bigger, but that's the biggest one I've personally had in the boat. Just mid-afternoon on the first day on the lake, and we've got some other big fish out there since. But it's not a bad first fish on that lake.
Awesome.
My biggest one ever was August. It was hot. It was mile-high sky. Very little wind. What little wind I had was out of the east, and I was fishing a point coming perpendicular to the shore. I was out on the end of the point when I noticed the Catholic priest was down on the end of the pier catching bluegills. So I just kind of went over there to say hi. Hey man, how you doing? He was having some health issues and just blah blah blah, and he caught another one and said, well, I got enough for my dinner, I'm going up, see you Sunday kind of deal. And he went up. And I looked down at my locator and said, boy, I'm way too shallow. I got to get out of here. And whop! Giant fish on. And of course, as it always has been and always will be, the pontoon boats have to go between me and the shore. It's some kind of rule. And a whole busload of old timers went between me and the shore, and just then this giant fish gets up and busts like 6 feet from this guy's pontoon and starts throwing water all over the surface, and he stops. So, sensitive guy I am, I yell, "Get the bleep out of here!" He gets on the gas and takes off, and then it dawned on me, and I went, "Oh, sorry, Father." And he stopped in the landing, he turned around and goes, "That's all right, I got you." I got instant absolution right there off the pier. And the fight ensued, and I landed the biggest fish of my life. And I'd like to believe it's my guide sense and my angling prowess, but sometimes he just gives you one. And that was the biggest fish of my life.
What'd you catch it on?
A Mepps giant killer with a gold scale blade. You've heard me talk about those before.
Yeah. Okay.
Good time.
Nice.
My personal best stories, because I've been doing this for a long time, and I don't, there's about a half a dozen muskies that I've caught that are that 55 plus range, and they're all personal bests because I don't rate one above the other. But I can tell you this, that, for example, my biggest Wisconsin fish was a 54 1/4, and I caught it on a bluebird day in the end of October, right around Halloween, dead flat, calm, sunny, only fish we saw all day. And it's funny because I caught that fish on a jig and fought it forever. And I did, in fact, you'll probably see it. I did the old Louis spray hold with it before I let it go, so that it's a vertical hold. But that fish was released. My biggest Canadian fish, there's about a half a dozen that are in that 55 plus class, and they're all big ones. But probably one of the most memorable is one of the ones that is on my YouTube channel. It's called the Birthday Beast 2, and that fish, I had not caught a fish for like 3 days. And I'm a grumpy guy when I don't catch fish, of course, like just most of us are. And it's 3 days in, and we're filming shows and trying to film a show, and I haven't caught a fish in 3 days. And throwing all the traditional blades and top water and all this other stuff. It's on Lake of the Woods, and I finally thought, I'm just going to clunk rocks. And so I put on a big Magnum shallow rater, and I think it was the first cast. I snapped the lure on, I cast it out, crank it down, it clunks rocks. Bluebird day, third day after a cold front. It was wind blowing hard out of the west-northwest. I pulled the bait down about 2-3 times, and it's clunking rocks, and all of a sudden the line goes slack, and I said, "Okay, here I've got a fish on." And I battled to the boat, and this is also the fish that tore my shoulder up, and I had a shoulder injury for about 2 years after that. But this we nicknamed the fish double dorsal because the fish actually had 2 dorsal fins, probably from an injury when it was young, but it grew 2 dorsal fins. And that fish was in the 56 plus inch class in terms of length. But probably my most memorable, there's many, but probably my most incredible day of musky fishing for personal best was a day I never appreciated till years later. I caught a 55 1/8 inch muskie on the French River, and it was the third 50 I'd taken that day. I caught 3 fish that day, all over 50, and the 55 1/8, which was a giant, of course. But the reason I'm saying I didn't appreciate that particular fish as much until years later is because I hooked an even bigger one, and sizably bigger, probably 4 to 6 inches longer. It was near the 60-inch class. Had it hooked well, and the snap failed on my leader, and the fish swam away with a bucktail in its mouth, and it just killed me for a long time. And so that 55 1/8 was big. The one I lost still haunts me to this day. It was just a super, super, super giant. One of those legendary, and this was on the French River. So, and then there's Goliath. If you check my YouTube channel, The Hunt for Goliath was, proportionately length, weight, everything else was probably, right there with all the biggest because it was long and thick. Double dorsal, by the way, wasn't overly thick, but had this gargantuan head. And you'll see it in the photo there. It could literally swallow a basketball. It could take a whole basketball inside of his mouth. So lots of memorable experiences. And, once you start talking about fish of that size, it's just very special. And I feel grateful that I just had those days on the water and was able to hold fish like that in my hand.
My personal best was 2011. it was a pretty sunny day, probably about a 10 to 12 mile an hour wind out of the southeast, and I was fishing with my brother and my nephew Jamie. And at the time, Jamie made a bait called the Martin, and we were fishing a deep weed line, probably about 18 to 22 feet, and with a deep basin out past it, and just working the edge. And all of a sudden, I really wasn't expecting it. It was actually early afternoon, and the fish hit, and it was, we weren't expecting a big fish, I guess to say, and it hit that Martin, and it was just a ton of fun. It kind of made everybody's day. So that's my story. And this is the lure I caught it on right here. This is actually a 13-inch Martin. As I mentioned earlier, they aren't being made right now, but Jamie might start making them again. So we've used 11s, 13s, and 15s, and caught a lot of fish on them.
My personal best muskie, it actually came on the first time I ever fished in Minnesota. I was out with Lee on Lake Mille Lacs. It was our second day of fishing. Well, before I even got there, I actually skipped school on that Friday to get up there. So that was a good, definitely worth it. But second day of fishing, it was like 11:45. We just came off of a moonset or a moonrise, cannot remember. But yeah, she bit. It was a Cisco Husky Medusa. It was really my first time throwing that bait at that bigger size, and it was a very nerve-wracking bite, just because once we got that thing on top of the water, we could just see that there was only one treble point in that fish. But it hit on the fourth rip of the Medusa on an upswing, and yeah, that was definitely a life-changing moment. Yeah, it was just one of those. It was just Lee and I in the boat, and definitely was a wrangle, but we got her netted. And yeah, that kind of sealed the deal for today's angler. Lee and I were like, yeah, we should probably keep doing this, because I don't know, it was such a special moment. But we got her out, and it was a 54.5 by 27. And I don't think I'll be beating that one soon. And on that very day, which is November 6th, 10 years before that, Lee got his biggest on that same day.
No kidding.
And weirdly enough, that same day when I caught that one, I think Ron Strand caught a 54.5 by 27, and Jason Hammernick's boat, I believe, got a 54.5 by 27. So 3 of the exact same caliber fish fit in that one window. So pretty insane.
No doubt.
Doesn't really get much textbook than that. Yeah, it's nuts. So yeah, that was the story of my biggest muskie.
Hi, hey, I was just gonna share the story of my personal best. I believe it was back in 2011 as well, and as well, it wasn't one of those days where we've had very good days where it's cloudy, ominous, looks like a huge big fish day. There really wasn't a cloud in the sky. It was late in the afternoon though. It was October, but the water temps were falling pretty fast, and they were getting to the temperature range, you might say, where the Ciscos were starting to, not a lot, but some of them were starting to move into those deep weed areas, especially late in the day. And this was, like I say, it was late in the afternoon, bright sunny skies, just working this big Martin here, and got a hit. It was one of those where it was kind of like the 3-crank tank, you call it. It was about 3 pulls and boom, it was on. Nothing I did. I really didn't do anything. The good Lord just decided to place it on my bait, and was able to keep it hooked. It did fight quite a bit, and was able to keep it hooked, and had a lifetime memory, that's for sure. But it sure was a fun day. I was fishing with my brother. I will have to add that when I fish with my brother, he's always got the boat in the best spots. It's like fishing with a
a pro guide every single day. So I'm very blessed and fortunate that way as well. Thanks a lot.